Hello! My name is Elizabeth Zemer, and welcome to my first Devlog video for my submission to the AIBO Visual Programming Contest, Mini AIBO. So this Devlog thing I'm doing is just an extra fun thing on the side, and I'm very aware that it has no bearing on what will become the final score for my project. The grading criteria says 55% of the project's score from the judges comes from creativity, the other 45% comes from the complexity of the project. And nowhere in there does submission made video log essay come into play or mean anything at all. And yes, also I know that this may not even be watched by the judges. I know how competitions work. I know they get dozens of submissions, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands. So if this isn't watched, that's okay. That's not exactly why I'm doing it either. I'm pretty much doing this for myself. I'm trying to have as much fun with this project as possible. And the reason for that is a little crazy, but I felt like I wouldn't be doing this right and I wouldn't actually be going all in if I didn't actually talk about it. So this sounds absolutely absurd, but with where I am now and the things I'm interested in, I can think of very few things that had as much of an impact on me and my interests in my life than the Sony AIBO and visual programming, the two very things that this project, this competition coalesces. So to explain that, I gotta go way back. When I was a little kid, I wasn't inherently obsessed with robots or anything. I liked Data from Star Trek, and probably the robot from the Jetsons, because I saw it on Boomerang. But they weren't a thing that existed in real life to me. They were still a thing of fantasy. But one day that changed. My school district started doing more assemblies at schools, and we were lucky to get some good ones. The first one was an animal presentation, and I believe the second one ended up being the presentation that meant the most to me personally, which was the robotics presentation. I went in there not knowing what to expect, but the presenter walked on stage, a really normal looking guy. He showed us robots, he showed us videos of robots, and I started to feel myself get more invested. But something changed when the presenter opened his box and pulled out a small robot dog. I learned later that's the AIBO ERS 210, but I didn't know that then. What I did know is that I was absolutely mesmerized. I didn't know why, but I never wanted to interact with something more in my life. I never wanted the presenter to be like, okay, who wants to come up and participate more than that very moment? And it didn't happen, but for whatever reason, that really sparked something in me. So I ran home and I told my parents, Mom, Dad, I really want a robot dog. You'll never guess what I saw at school today. And they were like, okay, honey, sure. At the time, I didn't understand the value of money, so unfortunately, a robot dog would be very, very far out of my grasp. At the time, I'm pretty sure the original series of AIBOs were still in production. I think it would have been the ERS 7's final installment, and they were discontinued shortly after. But, yeah, tough luck, kiddo. Try again next time, I guess. It didn't matter though. I was already super stoked about this, and it planted a little seed in my brain and started to get me interested in other things as well, specifically computers. Before then, I'd use the computer to play like educational CD-ROM games, but I started to go on the internet and I started looking things up about robots. And by association, I started learning about how robots are programmed. There were books around my house for languages like Java and C, and they were all very dense. I tried my best to keep up with them, but I was in 3rd grade, I believe, about that time, so it was still a little bit over my head. But I went online and I discovered this software suite called Scratch 1.4, and I downloaded it to my computer, and all of a sudden I was learning to think like a programmer. Scratch 1.4 and its community and introducing me to what would become proper programming languages showed me that I wanted to do something with computers as a job. It resonated with me, I really liked it, and most importantly, I knew something I could connect it with, which was robots. Eventually, grade school and middle school ended, and I knew I wanted to take it seriously, so in high school, I joined my school's robotics team, and eventually ended up leading it. I learned about electronics, and also I ended up doing some volunteer work for robotics companies, which was really fun. It turns out that all you need to do sometimes is ask nicely and people will be happy to help you help out with your projects. Surprise, surprise, another coincidence. The ERS 1000 now has a visual programming system, which is based on the very Scratch I became obsessed with and led me down the path I'm taking today. that path, incidentally, is college. I'm at college now, which is crazy. I'm almost exactly, actually, halfway through my first year, and I'm living in Indiana, going to the Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. I'm pursuing a major in electrical engineering and a multidisciplinary minor in robotics. I'm also studying Japanese, and all of those things were inspired by AIBO. And yes, there's yet another coincidence. This school used to have a RoboCup team, which was a competition sponsored by Sony, where institutes all over the world and universities and colleges would get together. They would use AIBOs, specifically AIBO ERS 210s and 220s. They would program them to play soccer, and then crowds of people would gather to watch these teams use their best software to try to win matches against each other. It's awesome. Anyway, even though there isn't RoboCup here anymore, the effects of that research and the power that robots can have in this field is still very, very present and is felt quite sincerely. So now that I'm in college and I'm trying to accomplish this big goal, and you know how I got here, I know what I want to do after this too. My dream is to graduate college and then go on to develop robots as a career. But specifically, I want to make robots that make people happier. I want to make robots that respect people's privacy. I want to make robots that are totally disconnected from violence. I want to make robots that help people explore new worlds and make it safer for them to do their work. And most importantly, I want to make robots that inflict positive emotions in people. What I learned is that part of the reason AIBO meant so much to me back then is because it is a robot that was designed specifically to make the user happy. It doesn't have any functional purpose outside of that, although that's changing with the API and allowing external apps to connect to AIBO. At least in the beginning, it was just for fun. It was to prove that robots could do something outside of hard labor, and it works. So TLDR, I want to make and develop for human-centered robots. So when I heard Sony was holding this competition, I got so excited because obviously it unites two things that mean so much to me. I remember it being Halloween and all my friends and my siblings were going around and trick-or-treating. I went home and I opened my computer, and it ended up being the day that the ERS 1000 was first announced in Japan. Sony hadn't done anything official with AIBO until that point, so everything I knew about it was just speculation. But it was just like first grade. I had opened the page and I could only understand a little, but I understood enough to know that AIBO was back, and Sony was still pursuing the dream of making robots that enhanced people's lives and inspired wonder. The wonder that I felt in first grade, and when I opened that page and saw the new AIBO for the first time, was exactly what AIBO was supposed to create. And that's super exciting to me. So that's why I'm doing this. This competition has a lot of meaning packed in it for me, and I want to take it head on. I want to have as much fun with it as I can, and when I finish, I want to submit it and come away with no regrets. I'm really excited about it, so thank you for having me. These videos are going to be minimally edited and probably a bit messy, but unfortunately, we take what we can get when we have an insane college curriculum, extracurriculars at college, and then me doing this project plus a bunch of extra stuff. So I still hope it ends up being a little enjoyable and takes you along on a fun little journey through AIBO visual programming. ERS 1000 is still a thing that's really far away from me, but through this competition, I'm going to have a chance to program it, which is not something I would have been able to do without this competition existing. And that's something I've wanted to do for a really long time. So thank you very much for holding this. I'm very happy. Okay, so now that the sappy life story is over, let's move on to the fun stuff. What is Mini AIBO? Okay, so the first thing I did after opening up the software was think about what the heck am I gonna make? The competition is completely open-ended, which means I can make whatever I want, which is exciting, but also a little intimidating, because I don't know what necessarily the judges will want to see. Is this supposed to be a little marketable tidbit to put AIBO on social media, or is it really supposed to be an opportunity for users to go all in with the tool and really push the programming tool to its limits? No matter which of those is the case, I knew I wanted to do something that I would be excited about and I would want to carry through to the end, and something that I would want to make as good as I possibly could. Since so much of my life has been spent inspired by the old AIBOs, I wanted to think about how universities like mine used AIBO and how consumers and hobbyists took the software and programmed it and created things that were fun to them. And so many of those early experiments and personalities were new AIBO personalities to run on your robot and replace an existing personality that you may have purchased. Making a new AIBO personality isn't exactly the most creative concept on Earth, which is a little worrying since creativity is worth such a huge chunk of the grading criteria. But I think it can imbue a lot of creativity in this concept. And I think it'll be really exciting to take this tool that might appear simple, which is a visual programming tool. It's Google Blockly, it's AIBO blocks, but we can take it and do something really complex with it, which I think is cool, and I think, hopefully, will be fun to use. So, do you know what a state machine is? If not, strap in, because we're gonna learn. A state machine is basically the fundamental tenet of how autonomous systems work. If you interact with something, like if you go to the train station and you walk up to the divider and you put your little card down and it lets you through and it takes your fare, within that is a state machine. There's a system that takes input from the outside world, which in this case is the NFC in the bus card. You tap it down, something happens inside the machine, and then an external output is created as a result, which is the gate turns and you go through and you get on your train. This concept extends directly to the world of robotics. All of the original AIBOs and their personalities are state machines. Sometimes multiple state machines working together, but you can pretty much boil down each old software like that to a single state machine that constantly loops, looks for what outside input is coming to the robot, and makes a decision based on that input. And of course, prioritizes which response is going to happen first, which one happens later, and which one happens after that. So my goal right now is to figure out how to create my own state machine that can run on the ERS 1000. Here's a little diagram I drew of the first part of what will eventually become a really complicated state machine. The machine enters here, and at this point, where it checks what stage of life it's in, whether it's a baby or juvenile or an adult, which is directly inspired, of course, by the AIBO Life series of softwares. Very historically important AIBO fact. Anyway, the entire software loops around this point. Every time AIBO receives an input, it will check here, move through the system, and then once it completes its action, it'll go straight back to the beginning and check it. At a really quick basis, it'll be slowed down while the AIBO is performing an action. For example, if the AIBO is dancing, it won't also be listening for commands, but as soon as it finishes the dance, it'll be right back to listening for what the next exciting thing to do is. So yes, state machine diagram. Right now, my goal today is to program all of the states that are necessary for the most important or direct external stimuli AIBO can get, or at least the ones that the visual block programming interface lets us use. In this case, those are when you're being petted on any of the sensors, when AIBO is holding something, if AIBO doesn't have enough charge, and if it can perceive items, such as the ball, the iBone, the die, another AIBO, the charging station, a face, a person, or a hand. It will check to see if any of these states are satisfied, and if it does, it'll respond accordingly. Now let's go take a look at the code.
Okay, so welcome to the beginning of my project. This is everything I did today, and, well, there's a lot of work to do still, but I got a pretty good start on it. So let's start from the top and work our way down. So first, this is how you start Mini AIBO. You can either click the flag within the programming interface, you can press the spacebar, or while your AIBO is not already running Mini AIBO, which is defined by this variable here called living, you can ask it, or rather tell it, nice to meet you, and it will start the program. Then, as soon as the program is started, the personality starts to configure itself. So right now, we only have a few things set, but this is what all of these do. So first, it tells the program that it is running. So that's, again, the living variable. It's set to 1 because I don't want to accidentally reference something that might end the program. if I'm not supposed to. So this is basically a safety fallback. As long as this is one, mini AIBO will not end if I program everything correctly. Next we got stage. As you can see over here, I've written what value this variable will refer to. And all of the rest of the code I write will come back to this variable and check this number to decide what kind of action I will perform when it receives a certain external stimulus. So here you can see 0 will be for the baby, there will be 2 juvenile settings and 3 adult settings. Finally, I have this one called liveliness. So way back in the day, one huge complaint with some software for the ERS 210 called AIBO Life 2, or was it 1? Anyway, some of the early software had problems with if you pet your AIBO a little too much, it would become really mopey and sad. But anyway, I don't think there should be a personality specifically that acts sad, but I do think it should be possible for an AIBO of any personality to be a little bit more outgoing and lively than another AIBO with the same personality type. So I've created this variable called liveliness. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to increase it and decrease it right now, but I think it'll depend on the kind of stimulus you give AIBO over a longer period of time. And for example, when AIBO approaches a person, if its liveliness is pretty high, it'll bark more than it will when its liveliness isn't so high. And if its liveliness is low, then it's not going to bark at you at all. It'll just look at you really cutely. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's going to be a cute feature. Anyway, after the program starts, we're going to go to the first part of the state machine. You can see that there's a huge gap here. This is because I haven't decided, like, if there isn't an immediate external stimulus going on, AIBO has to think and decide what it wants to do next. So if I'm not telling AIBO anything, if AIBO isn't low on battery, if there isn't a toy directly in front of it, it needs to make a decision. Is it going to walk around? Is it going to scratch itself? All of that is going to be determined inside these blocks. But for now, we're going to invoke this thing called check state, which is kind of like it's basically an extension of the main state machine. It's pretty much its own state machine, but I put it in its own function, or these are pretty much functions, the when I receive blocks. But anyway, I put it in its own function just to make it easier to manage and read. A huge part of programming with these block programming languages is just making sure everything's readable. You can create a lot of stuff, and then even though the blocks are big and easy to understand for young people, it can still get confusing. So it's important to make comments frequently and document everything you do. Anyway, so here's a quick preview of some of the things AIBO will do when it receives an external stimulus. If AIBO can't move, it's going to tell you that, and then it will end the program. So hopefully this will prevent me from doing any undue harm to any AIBO that might be super low on power. This state is dedicated specifically to the power level of the battery. So it looks really complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. If AIBO has very low battery or just has low battery in general, either of these two states, I don't know, since I don't have an ERS 1000, I should mention, I'm making a lot of guesses. I don't know how low this low battery flag is, and I don't know how low this very low battery flag is. They could be close together, or they could be far apart. So, to be on the safe side, I'm just going to check both of them. Anyway, if it has low battery, it's going to look for you. It has some definitions to make sure, depending on the stage. So, if it's a baby, it's not going to get up and look for you. But if it's not a baby, it will look for a person, and if it sees you, it'll head straight towards you and respond accordingly. It calls another function up here called approach person that handles that. Next, I got immediate sensors, like paw pads being pushed. You can see that different personality stages respond in different ways. Petting AIBO. And that's it for now. So you can see, there's still a lot to do, but I think this is a pretty good start. So tomorrow I will log back on and make another update.